Ever have one of those beautiful days where everything is going well? Even your life stressors can't touch you. All of a sudden, you step into a big pile of mud. And some of those days, it feels like an endless muddy trench. Well, this is Mud on a Monday, a series highlighting the setbacks along the path to success of individuals who are prominent in their craft. From politicians, business tycoons, and technological visionaries to legends of sports, music, film, TV, and of course, video games. It's easy for historical or prominent figures to seem almost mythical to us, especially as time goes on, right? Lincoln is definitely one of these figures. However, many of us would find the young Lincoln to be very relatable. Broke, wide-eyed, and without a concrete plan, but he was ambitious. And he was dedicated. Let's dig in. In April of 1831, Lincoln arrives in New Salem, a town founded just 2 years earlier in Sangamon County. He had been hired along with his cousin to lead a flatboat of goods down the river. They got stranded, stuck on the mill dam at New Salem, and everybody quickly learned who Lincoln was. He ordered the men to remove cargo from the rear of the flatboat in order to release it. The man who hired him, Denton Offutt, now I might be butchering that name. I should make it clear right now. I'm not a historian, I'm not a scholar. I'm just a nerd trying to motivate you in really the only way I know how. So the man who hired him was so impressed with the way Lincoln handled the situation, and being only 22, he offered him the clerk position at a general store that he would be opening. Unfortunately, it just never materialized. Apparently, Mr. Offutt was not very good with money, and the operation quickly went bankrupt. So Lincoln decides to get back on the Sangamon River and earn money that way. By August 1st, 1831, Election day comes, and Lincoln has now been in New Salem for about 4 months. He spent the entire day entertaining voters at the polls. This allowed him to meet most of the men in town. I should note, back then, no women nor any people of color were allowed to vote. Per the 1818 Illinois Constitution, only white males above the age of 21 who have been residing in the state of Illinois for at least 6 months prior to the state election day may vote. So yeah, let's just cringe together past this. So Lincoln spends the rest of 1831 planting firm roots in town and continued his constant pursuit of self-improvement that constantly pops up. He becomes part of a local debating society, reads Shakespeare and Robert Burns, and learns basic math. On March 9, 1832, 23-year-old Lincoln makes his first public statement in a bid for a seat on the Illinois state legislature. It's published in the Sangamon Journal. Lincoln's speech focuses on the need for federally funded internal improvements, which were badly needed throughout Sangamon County, such as good roads, railroads to improve commerce and communications, navigable streams, canals, a law to thwart usury, the illegal practice of lending money at unreasonably high rates, and altering certain local laws, such as the fencing of cattle. He also spoke of decent education to improve one's own appreciation for the free institutions of the U.S., which he believed to be of, quote, vital importance, unquote. The last paragraph is one that shows a bit of what lays underneath the surface of the young Lincoln, a real ambition to be respected among his fellow men. So I'm going to go ahead and read that paragraph. Every man is said to have his peculiar ambition. Whether it be true or not, I can say for one that I have no other so great as that of being truly esteemed of my fellow men, by rendering myself worthy of their esteem. How far I shall succeed in gratifying this ambition is yet to be developed. I am young and unknown to many of you. I was born and have ever remained in the most humble walks of life. I have no wealthy or popular relations to recommend me. My case is thrown exclusively upon the independent voters of this county, and if elected, they will have conferred a favor upon me, for which I shall be unremitting in my labors to compensate. But if the people in their wisdom shall see fit to keep me in the background, I have been too familiar with disappointments to be very much chagrined. Pretty impressive. For a guy who's just 23 years old, he makes it very clear that he has literally nothing but his own name and whatever reputation he has made in this town, and that's it. Lincoln was known in New Salem for his level-headed thinking and impartiality, which was useful as he mediated local disputes and even judged local horse races. His unique personality of self-deprecating humor, odd stories, and a humble manner of speaking endeared him in the young community, despite a lack of any connections when he came to town, no formal education, and no wealth of any kind. In April 1832, the Black Hawk War breaks out in the state, causing the governor in Illinois to have his men enlist for a state militia. Lincoln was working at a general store that was failing, so he decided to enlist immediately. The men in each militia regiment got to elect their own captain. The 4th Regiment of Illinois Mounted Volunteers elected Lincoln by a large majority. He served 51 days in total, saw no fighting, and by mid-July he was walking back to New Salem. Lincoln would recall this as a huge personal achievement. For the first time in his life, he had indeed earned the esteem of his fellow men, enough to earn being his regiment's captain. He arrives in New Salem just 2 weeks before the election and uses the time to campaign. Election Day 1832 arrives. The top 4 vote-getters would be winning the 4 available seats on the Illinois state legislature. Many of these candidates were presented by other politicians. However, Lincoln spoke for himself. He placed 8th out of 13 candidates, losing by 150 votes. Doesn't seem like much, but it was a pretty small town. He had no real qualifications, essentially 0 formal education, worked as a store clerk, and only entered the race on the urging of close friends in New Salem, a small town in Sangamon County. Out of 8,015 votes in Sangamon County, Lincoln only got 380, roughly 20% of the votes. But that doesn't really tell the whole story here. We have to look closer to see the effect of Lincoln's reputation up until this point and the fruits of the labor he had put in. In New Salem, 300 votes were cast. Out of those, Lincoln got 277. So, while Lincoln's reputation hadn't reached very far beyond New Salem at this point, it had already made a very strong impression. That would help him later on. But for now, he had to take that L, man. There was just no other way to produce the win at that point. It was pretty impressive that he placed 8th. And sometimes we really don't want to give ourselves credit for a participation trophy. But we can't forget the progress we've made. That becomes super important for Lincoln in the next moment. So, after the election results, Lincoln finds himself unemployed yet again. But not for long this time. This is not 1831. This is not 1832 for much longer. Things start turning. So the end of 1832 comes and it doesn't seem like Lincoln is going anywhere. However, in January of 1833, he tries his hand at the general store business, but the business fails simply to a larger competitor. However, in May 7th of 1833, Lincoln, now aged 24, goes through his first major moment. Well, probably second, I would say, after being captain of the militia. But nevertheless, politically, this is his first big moment. So President Andrew Jackson names Lincoln New Salem's new postmaster. This is a position that he would go on to hold for 3 years and excelled at. Lincoln opposed President Jackson and even voted for his opposition in the last presidential election, Henry Clay. However, Lincoln became the natural choice as he was known for his impartiality by this point, and no Democrat wanted the job. Lincoln, at the time, is part of the Whig Party. So the postmaster position didn't pay much, so that sucked. But it did deepen his ties to the community. See, the last postmaster was too busy serving the men whiskey to deliver the mail promptly, which angered the women of New Salem. Meanwhile, Lincoln would walk the extra miles to deliver mail that he knew folks were eagerly waiting for. So the women of New Salem loved Lincoln. Lincoln made some extra money by chopping wood, handling basic legal matters, despite not even being a lawyer yet, and splitting wood rails, which is the origin of the rail splitter nickname that he got in 1860, the year he would become U.S. president. So, yeah, never doubt your humble origins, right? So, near the end of 1833, Lincoln secures a second job as a deputy county surveyor, okay, under the county surveyor John Calhoun. The position was only accepted by Lincoln because he was assured no political commitment of any kind was necessary. So clearly Lincoln wants that distance from the political stage. So it's almost as he's rebuilding and recasting himself anew. Also in 1833, Lincoln begins his legal studies formally under the encouragement and advice of a friend, John Todd Stewart. So he purchases a book of legal forms, writes up mortgage, deeds, and similar agreements, and even argued small cases. By 1834, Lincoln was now 25 and had been living in New Salem for 3 years. So the impression that he had quickly made by the 1832 election had now grown throughout Sangamon County. He participated in Whig Party meetings as a secretary, became a postmaster, deputy county surveyor, and continued his legal studies while already gaining actual experience as a lawyer, despite the fact that he wouldn't become one for another 2 years. This was far from the 22-year-old who got stranded at the mill dam. I cannot stress that enough. It was now time to apply all of those lessons that Lincoln had learned. On August 4th, 1834, Lincoln runs for the Illinois State Legislature once again. This time, however, he placed second among all candidates, finally winning one of the 4 coveted seats. Some of the big differences, not just one, some of the big differences this time around was that he got votes from both Whig and Democrat voters. He made less speeches at this time, didn't make any promises, and managed to meet nearly every family in Sangamon County. Not just New Salem, all of Sangamon County. He used his unique brand of odd charm, weird little stories, and simple, humble words to win them over. All of this combines to get Lincoln his first political victory, while also making 1832 an outlier in his political career, as it's the only time Lincoln will lose an election on a direct vote. That means directly voted by the people. Lincoln's level-headedness, his impartiality, his poise, and his unique charm would become well known and thoroughly developed over the years. But at this moment in time, it was clear. The young Lincoln had arrived. He had indeed won the esteem of his fellow men in Sangamon County, And he would go on to make the most of it. I think he served about 6 years on the Illinois State Legislature. And that concludes what we're going to look at in Lincoln's time in New Salem from 1831 to 1834. This is now the second half of the podcast where I want to now, after talking about the person's moments through the mud that we're looking into, I wanted to analyze them and see things that I learned while researching this, and maybe it can help you. So, like I said, we're going from 1831 to 1834. That's only those 3 years, not after or Lincoln's upbringing. That's a whole nother different talk. I learned 3 things from researching Lincoln, and we're going to go over that on the analysis. Perseverance, the power of humility and impartiality, and third, the process of constant self-improvement. So, perseverance. Setback after setback in Lincoln's both professional and personal life continue hitting him, and yet somehow he continues just trekking through the mud. Sometimes he takes moments to regather himself, and sometimes he's been, from what it seems from letters from friends at that time, that Lincoln is completely depressed. At one point, friends of his had to take razors from his room. Now, there is some debate as to the validity of those letters, but it's well-founded research at this point. So, despite all those rough moments, Lincoln always comes back, somehow regathers himself, and tries again, keeps moving forward. And it really seems like it's all he knows how to do. Just keep moving forward. He's stuck at the mill dam in New Salem. The general store never opens in 1831. He loses the 1831 election. Despite all that, just keeps on going. Lincoln learns that the only way to get through this life is to keep moving forward. You can't control what you're born into, what wealth you start with, who you know at the start, what education you come from, or even what applicable skills you start out with. But you can change it all day by day, as evidenced by his own insane thirst for self-improvement. It's raining, it's muddy, you can't see a damn thing, and sometimes you keep falling down over and over and over again. Yet, you gotta get up. You gotta keep on marching forward because it's all you know. So whatever happens, keep moving forward. Now on to humility and impartiality. I put these together because in terms of Lincoln, they're extremely intertwined. One feeds the other. His humble nature influences his impartial nature. Talks in simple words, seems to always want to do what's fair. All of those things are tied together heavily. It all comes back from Lincoln's upbringing. So, but that's not what we're talking about. We want to talk about the kid who arrives in New Salem and what happened to that kid over the next 3 years. He was broke. And if not for making a friend on the first night, he wouldn't even have had a place to stay. On another occasion, he was seeking romantic company. Lincoln attempted to negotiate the amount to be paid as he didn't have enough. The woman found him amusing and told Lincoln's friend, who had a good laugh about it, and remarked that it was just like Lincoln to do that. Lincoln made friends in town as a general store clerk, which earned him the respect to then be noticed for that impartiality, for that humility. That let him resolve local disputes, write legal agreements. His humility and impartiality are it's like a deadly 1-2 punch for anyone opposing it, as it's incredibly tough to counter. And politically, that shines. It's ideal. Now, these are the gifts that he's always had in him. It's not really something he developed. However, his ability to actually use those gifts professionally really gets traction in New Salem. In 1831, he referred to himself in his early 20s as a friendless, uneducated, penniless boy working on a flatboat at $10 per month. Not someone who seems to think very much of themselves, and you'd be very wrong. It's just seems like the comment of someone who is extremely self-aware of their present situation. So be humble, be fair is what I learned from researching this. It can open doors, it can forge friendships from strangers or rivals. And Lincoln does just that in his presidential cabinet later. It bears fruit here in New Salem. So, being fair, being humble, what do we have to lose, right? Okay, so lastly, to finish off this podcast, we're going to talk about the last thing that I picked up from Lincoln. Process over everything. Lincoln read a ton, enjoyed debating, constantly putting out his best effort in all he did, and was open to hearing opposing perspectives, most notably in his presidential cabinet. Also, the man seems to never waste a move on the chessboard, and it seems to improve as he gets older. In New Salem, first year he arrives, he's at the polls meeting all the men. He wouldn't even go into politics for another year. That process is already there. His desire to appeal to the greater good rather for his own profit makes him a persuasive force among his peers throughout his political life. You see that beginning in New Salem as he quickly earns the respect of the townsfolk as a general store clerk. Throughout his political life, he's constantly tweaking the formula of this persona, refining it from the rambunctious roots in the Whig Party. He has some wild stories. Let me just sidetrack. I wasn't going to do this, but this is pretty funny. So in one Whig Party moment, they're going to get into a fight. Some of the Whig Party folks that he's with some of the Democrats. It goes really bad, and Lincoln organizes all of the Whig Party members to escape via a bathroom window. Yeah, that's your future president right there. So it was insane researching this New Salem time, because by the time we hear about Lincoln as president, he's extremely refined. This is not the man that I thought I'd be looking into. So Lincoln was used to labor also since he was a boy. So he learns that work ethic from that rough upbringing. The kid was frequently rented out by his father to his neighbors. So while he hated it, he did take out one thing, that work ethic, high quality work product. His work ethic, coupled with that drive for self-improvement, allowed him to continue growing. And with that humility, that ego never got too big, right? Where it would work against him. You need some ego. Confidence is good. Arrogance is not. So bust your ass. Keep working on yourself. Always give it your best shot, no matter how small the task is. Be a star in your role. Keep racking up those days, a good day put in, and soon your time will come. So stay ready so you don't have to get ready. So what do we learn from Lincoln? The process is everything. Everything. Some days are just going to suck, but you just got to stick with it. Be humble and be fair. Doesn't cost anything, and it seems the entire world can open at your feet. And just keep moving forward. Just keep moving forward. So that ends the first podcast. We're running a little bit over about 25 minutes. I'm not sure if this will be the length of all of them in the future. And I guess we'll just see. But I would like to thank anyone and everyone who has been listening to this, has gotten this far. Even if you just listen for a quick minute or two, I definitely want to thank you. I'll be making another one of these in 2 weeks, and I'll be announcing the person that it'll be on probably on Friday or maybe a bit sooner. I'm not too sure yet, even though I already know who the next person is. If you have any questions that you want to ask, or really anything you want to comment at, go ahead and leave it below on this video. I would like to definitely have a guest here on the second portion of the podcast. So I would like to be able to talk about who it is that the podcast is on, in this case Lincoln this time, go over the muddy moments in that person's life, analyze them, see what I learned from that, and maybe some things that we can take away. Still learning. And then in the second half of the podcast, have a guest from the game dev community come in and talk a little bit about some of their own muddy moment that they had, their current project, and maybe share a couple laughs, share a couple tips in the community, and just go from there. The purpose of this is for me to really network with more individuals in the game dev community and contribute in the most meaningful way that I know how. I like to write, and I am fascinated by people in history who have gone through everyday issues like the rest of us, and they just found a way to succeed. I guess sometimes you can believe fate is fate, but you can also believe that you can make your own luck. Nothing is set in stone, and your story isn't written yet. If you're still here, you're still above dirt, your story's not written yet. So don't forget that.